You're watching Breakthrough News.
I'm Charlotte Hohenstein, and you're watching Breakthrough News on BTR Today. On today's show, we're talking to Gretchen Reynolds, health and fitness writer for the New York Times, about a new study that shows that physical fitness in your 20s categorically improves your mental fitness 25 years later. Gretchen, thank you very much for joining us today. This is a really fascinating result. I'm just going to quickly summarize the study for our viewers. As you write about, the CARDIA study measured fitness levels of several thousand young adults between the ages of 18 to 30 in the mid-80s, and then recently returned to a couple thousand of these people 25 years later, remeasured their fitness levels, and then also measured cognitive skills. And the results clearly showed that the people fittest as young adults were also much sharper later on in life. So you're a health writer, you obviously know a lot about health and fitness. Was this surprising for you to find out?
No, I mean, it actually grows or adds to a growing body of evidence that how fit you are at any age is going to affect how well you could think. What was not known was that how fit you are at 25 is going to affect how well you can think at 50. That was a little bit of a surprise.
And what was amazing was the very clean correlation between even, I think the way it broke down was every extra minute of running that the person could do correlated to an extra word that they could remember 25 years later, and also which in turn correlated to one extra year less of mental aging. Did I get that right?
Yes, actually, you did very well. Your brain is quite sharp. What they did was they had the people, when they were 25, many of them did what's called a run to exhaustion, meaning you get on a treadmill and run as hard as you can for as long as you can. And the average length of time that those 25-year-olds could run was about 10 minutes, which is okay, but not great, to be frank. It suggested that most of them were in good health, but were not tremendously fit. And so when they had them come back 25 years later, they ran on the treadmill again until they were exhausted. And any person who, when they were 25, ran more than 10 minutes, who could continue going longer, could now remember, in essence, one word more on a list of words that they had to memorize. And that may not sound really impressive, unless you're my age, and then it does, but in fact it correlated to, in effect, a 50-year-old having the mental ability of a 49-year-old. And that, it appears, will correlate down the road to a much reduced risk of dementia. And again, for people my age, that starts to become a big concern. But what's interesting is the roots of that started at the age of 25, and depending on if someone was fit or not.
Do you think, and this is something that you mentioned earlier, do you think this connection between physical fitness and mental agility is underappreciated right now? Because it seems like certainly, you know, the physical benefits, even the holistic physical benefits of staying fit, everybody realizes, but maybe young people are still not thinking about it in terms of mental fitness in a way that they should.
Well, to be honest, I don't think very many 25-year-olds think they will ever lose their memory, but by the time you're 30, you actually are starting to not think as well. And there's very clear evidence that after the age of 30, your brain starts to shrink. You lose brain cells. That process is much slower if you exercise. And in fact, if you exercise regularly, you will keep adding brain cells even as you get older. You add twice, 3 times as many brain cells if you exercise than if you don't. And that's really important as you get older. As I said, by the time you're 30, your brain is starting to shrink.
God, well, I mean, that's sort of worrying and encouraging at the same time. I mean, so do you think this study will encourage younger people and people watching this to get out there and exercise more? Or, I mean, you sort of hinted at that we find it quite difficult to really plan, 25 years in advance.
I hope that it might inspire some younger people, but the best evidence is it won't. It is very hard when you are young to believe in consequences. And again, what they were finding in this study were very subtle changes. So you actually have to know that things are happening in your brain. And most young people don't know that. Their brain feels great. They can remember what beer they had last night. They can remember what they did. The changes become very subtle. And so I hope that people will get the message that being fit, exercising, and not doing a lot, but just exercising at all may help to ensure that you can think a lot better when you're 40 and a whole lot better when you're 60 and 70.
Mm. And I saw another study that actually just flat out said that actually memory loss, and this seemed very surprising to me, but that memory loss actually begins in your 20s. And what was particularly alarming was that it was claiming that it actually occurs almost at the same rate as much later in life, even into your 60s and 70s, but that you just don't notice it early on in life because you have too much capital, which is how they described it. Does that sound convincing?
Actually, that probably is true, and it makes sense if you think of your brain as having a certain amount of reserve. I mean, you're young, you have a lot of capacity, you can remember a lot of things, so you don't notice as much that you aren't remembering some things. You start by the time you're 35 or so, most people will start noticing that they can't quite remember where they put their car keys. That's often one of the first symptoms of very, very, very mild changes in how well you think. And you probably were starting to have some of those problems even when you were 20. You just don't notice. And your brain is sharper in all sorts of ways than it is when you're 40, 50. And so the changes are much harder to see, much harder to appreciate. So we actually have to tell people, your brain is already starting to change, and you can slow that process. You can change how quickly it happens. You can change how much it happens by doing a really simple thing, which is getting up and walking. That may be enough to slow the loss of memory in young people.
Well, we're going to take a quick music break in a second. Before we do, just a snap decision from you. If you have the option between going for a 10-minute walk, let's say, or doing a 10-minute sort of Sudoku or brain teaser, which would you choose just purely for intellectual ability?
There's actually very good science that if you're choosing one of those to help your brain be healthy, the walk is much more important than the Sudoku. It actually will have a much bigger impact. So go for a walk.
Great. Well, we will be right back in a moment after a brief excerpt from this week's episode of Serious Business featuring Palehound. We're back with Gretchen Reynolds talking about health and fitness and how staying fit in your 20s can help you much later on in life. Gretchen, do you think that people, let's talk about the idea of fitness itself and what it means to be moderately fit, very fit. Do you think people have a slightly warped idea of fitness and sometimes actually perhaps get too extreme when thinking about it? I mean, I read in one website online that is a health and fitness website that actually advocated heavy gardening as a muscle strengthening exercise that you could do throughout the week, which just seems so mild to me. But maybe we are sometimes thinking about it in terms that are much too extreme.
I would say yes, we are thinking about it in terms that are much too extreme if the end goal is health. I mean, if your end goal is to run a marathon, then you actually have to do an extreme amount of exercise. If your goal is health, and that includes the ability to think well, it includes the ability to get up and move and do whatever you want, to be as strong as you need to be, then you don't have to do a whole lot to achieve that. There's really good evidence that 30 minutes of walking 4 or 5 times a week will reduce your chance of becoming sick. It will keep your brain healthy. It will almost certainly add years to your life. You don't have to do a lot, but you have to do something. And if it's gardening, gardening actually can be really pretty good exercise. It may not be as much as... No, it's hard to believe. And in New York, not many people have gardens anyway. But there are lots of things you can do that don't have to even count as exercise. I mean, go for a walk at lunchtime. Make sure that you choose a restaurant that's 4 or 5 blocks away. That's exercise. That's going to add to your life. It's going to add to your ability to think. And you don't even have to call it exercise at all.
Well, right, because I mean, for people living in the city, young urban professionals with office jobs, oftentimes you can think about that in terms of how difficult it is to get to the gym or to get to that yoga class. But you're saying that even if you just make that effort to walk, even if you can't walk to and from work, walking to a restaurant a few blocks away every day, that counts. So actually, maybe
absolutely it counts.
Okay.
Anything at all that you do that isn't sitting is going to count. You don't have to belong to a gym. There's very good science showing you can do what's called body weight exercises and get a wonderful full body weight training exercise or workout. Do a few push-ups, do a few sit-ups. You don't have to do a lot. You don't have to use a lot of equipment. You can be very innovative. Do something also that you enjoy. There's really, really strong evidence that the only thing that keeps people exercising is not some belief that way off in the future their brain will be better, not even being thinner. What keeps people exercising is that they like it. So find something you like. If you hate running, don't run. I do run, so it's not that I'm telling people don't run because I don't like it. But a lot of people don't. If you don't like running, don't do it. Go to Zumba, go to some circus arts class. Find something that you enjoy. Try and do it almost every day, and it will have a profound impact on your health and well-being and your ability to think.
And I read apparently 67% of people who have gym memberships don't even use them, which seems to be part of this mindset of trying to actually set the bar maybe too high and then falling short of it, when actually there are so many easier ways.
Absolutely. The amount of money that's wasted on gym memberships and on buying treadmills and on buying things that people have in their home and then use to put their clothing on is really sad, because the human body is built to be moving. There's got to be something that you enjoy that involves getting up and just moving. Dancing is wonderful. Again, gardening is not bad. Anything that you can find that you will stick with, and that beginning when you are young, you don't get a free pass if you're 25. You do need to be doing something at that age to ensure that when you're my age, your brain is working well, your heart is working well, you can do all the things that you want to do with your life.
And you most recently in the New York Times wrote about exercise snacking, which is a new term. But it is exactly this idea of small intervals of exercise regularly, and that's actually more beneficial, this article was saying, than one super intense workout.
Exactly, which is science keeps coming up with these ways to make our lives easier, and this is one where there's a lot of evidence that you can break up these long sessions of exercise. You don't have to run for an hour. You don't even have to walk for 30 minutes. You can do something for 10 minutes at a time. You can probably do something for 5 minutes at a time if you're really busy. And all of those little exercise snacks, as the researchers call them, do add up, and they do make a difference in your health and your fitness, and again, probably in your ability to think 20 years from now.
So just before we conclude this conversation, you said half an hour of walking 4 to 5 times a week earlier. Would that be your most basic recipe for moderate exercise?
That's actually the formal guidelines from the federal government and the American College of Sports Medicine, is as a sort of basic guideline is try to briskly walk, which counts as moderate exercise, at least 4 or 5 times a week. And that's a good sort of baseline. You can do more. If you can't do that, you can do less, and you'll still get health and fitness benefits. And by and large, you really will enjoy it, and your body will feel much better.
Great. Well, I encourage our viewers actually maybe to test themselves with that exhaustion test. The average time for the younger bracket between the ages of 18 to 30 was 10 minutes, constantly upping. Do you know how often they increased the speed at which they were running?
Pretty frequently. It basically, and this is easier to do if you have actually someone else increasing the speed for you. Otherwise, you have to do it and be watching it. But they started out at a sort of gentle jog, and at least every 30 seconds to a minute would increase the speed until someone just could not go any longer.
Wow. Okay. So for the young adults, the average time was 10 minutes. For the people in the older age bracket, the average was 7 minutes. So people should go check out how long they can run for.
and aim to increase it.
Right, at increasing intervals. Well, thank you very much, Gretchen. That's all the time we have for now. To continue the conversation, share your thoughts with us on Twitter at Breakthrough News. We'll be right back in a moment after this quick excerpt from a special episode of Live Studio featuring Thus Ages and Ages.
A fight that we had once so easily back when things were getting old. Now when this happened, I was weighed, I was worn. I had some malleable pose I had sworn to never end up in again. As it turns out now, I know that I was wrong. Still
Thank you everyone for tuning in. I'm Charlotte Hohenstein, and this is Breakthrough News, an independent news show for the free-thinking web. We bring you a range of voices on the issues that today's generation is thinking about. Be sure to check out breakthroughradio.com through the weekend for our continued Selling Out Week coverage, including our feature on the commercial legacy of Lou Reed. That's it for what's breaking through the news today. Tell us what's breaking through your world on Twitter at Breakthrough News. I'm Charlotte Hohenstein, and thank you for joining us.